She was on her knees in a pool of freezing water, gripping the dog's soaked fur like it was the only thing anchoring her to life. Her eyes were wild, her whispers broken. "I'll save you this time, I swear." From outside, boots pounded the porch. A shoulder slammed against the door. "Police, stop what you're doing." But what they found inside wasn't a crime. It was grief, splintered and soaked in memory. In the next 30 minutes, you're going to hear a story that might shake you, move you, maybe even change you. A story about a woman, a dog, and a love too deep to bury. Stay till the very end, because this isn't just drama. It's a powerful lesson about loss, healing, and the kind of love that walks on 4 legs. And if it touches you, please subscribe to Valor Tails. Let's grow this family to 5,000 hearts. It started with a phone call at 2:37 in the morning. The dispatcher picked up, expecting maybe a burglar alarm or a deer in the road, but the voice on the other end trembled. "Hi, yes, sorry, but I think something's wrong at Maggie Turner's place. I live across the street and I heard her crying, screaming actually, like really screaming, and the dog. I swear, it sounded like it was being killed." The line went quiet for a second. Then, "You remember her, right, Maggie Turner? I think you better get someone out here. Fast." End of quote. Maple Hollow was not the kind of town where police rushed anywhere. The loudest thing most nights was the sound of a radiator popping or a cat knocking over a trash can. But Officer Daniels didn't hesitate. Neither did his rookie partner, Wilson. They were already in uniform, running drills at the station. The call changed everything. They pulled onto Birchwood Lane, a quiet, sleepy stretch with only 6 houses, and saw the lights on in the last one. The Turner house. For light blinking, curtains torn. A soft howl rising from inside, like someone or something was drowning. Daniels stepped out of the cruiser, boots crunching on thin ice. "You smell that?" he asked Wilson. "Like burnt tea. Or wet fur?" "Exactly." A shape stood across the street. George Littleton, 72, stiff shoulders. Always wore socks with sandals and mowed his lawn in perfect lines, even in October. "She's at it again," George muttered as they approached. His arms were crossed, but his voice wasn't angry, just tired. "I've been telling you all for 2 years now. She's not safe. Not for herself, not for anyone else." Wilson was about to respond when another sound came through the door. Water sloshing, then a choked sob. "God, no, please not again. Not again." Daniels moved fast. He pounded the door with the side of his fist. "Maple Hollow Police. Mrs. Turner? Maggie? Are you all right?" No answer. Only the sound of whimpering and one low, wet growl. Then Maggie's voice. Muffled, broken, almost too soft to hear. "Mommy's here, baby. I'm not letting you go this time. I swear I won't." That was enough. Daniels backed up, gave the signal. Wilson kicked the door just below the handle. The wood cracked. A second kick, and it swung open. The air inside was thick like the inside of an old chest. Smelled like mildew and cinnamon. Curtains hung half off the rails. Piles of newspapers on the floor. But all of that faded because, in the middle of the living room, right there under a yellow ceiling fan that spun without moving air, was Maggie Turner. She was kneeling beside a plastic laundry tub, maybe 2 feet wide, filled to the brim with water. Her hair was wild. White strands stuck to her face. She was soaking wet. And she was holding something in her arms. No someone. At first, Wilson thought it was a child. The way she cradled it, whispered to it. But then he saw the fur, the tail. It was a dog, a golden retriever, laying limp in the water, head half submerged, eyes closed but not lifeless. Maggie whispered again. "You're gonna be okay, sweetie. Just hold on. Just don't leave Mommy. Not again." Her voice cracked on the last word. She rocked back and forth, fingers gripping the dog's soaked fur, pressing its body gently into the water, like she was washing it or baptizing it. Daniels stepped forward, slowly. "Maggie," he said softly. "It's Dan. It's okay. You're safe now." Maggie didn't look up. I told him to wait for me, she mumbled. I told him not to go near the lake without me, but I was baking. Just for 10 minutes. I was baking. Daniels crouched beside her, keeping his voice calm. Maggie, that's not Eli. That's your dog. Remember? That's Hope. She blinked, finally looked up. Her eyes were red and wild, searching Daniel's face for something that wasn't there. I know, she said, barely a whisper. But he feels like Eli, and he was shaking. Just like that day, I thought. I thought I could save him this time. Daniels didn't correct her. He just nodded. Behind him, Wilson knelt by the dog. Hope was breathing shallow but steady. Still warm, probably in shock, but alive. George stood in the doorway, arms still crossed, a sigh escaping from somewhere deep inside his chest. I hope you see it now, he said. She needs help, not just company. Help. Daniels didn't look at him. Instead, he wrapped Maggie in a dry blanket Wilson had found. He let her sob against his chest, the way she must have done 30 years ago, when Eli slipped beneath that lake and never came back up. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet that pressed into your chest like snow falling on an open grave. Hope shifted slightly, laid his head on Maggie's knee. Even in her confusion, she reached down and stroked him once, gently. Outside, the wind picked up. George lit a cigarette. Even though he had promised his late wife, he'd quit. He took one long drag, then muttered, "This town's getting too damn quiet." And then he was gone, footsteps crunching into the night. The morning after the incident, the house was quiet. The officers had gone. Hope was asleep in a sunbeam on the porch, wrapped in a towel. Maggie had taken a sedative and was finally resting. The stillness was fragile like glass that had been cracked but hadn't yet shattered. Lena stood alone in the hallway of the Turner house, looking down toward the back bedroom. The door was ajar, just like it always had been since she was a little girl. That room had never been locked, never redecorated, never touched. Not really. Time hadn't moved forward in there. It had simply stopped. She stepped inside. The air was different, cooler, tinged with lemon polish and something older, like dried glue or pressed paper. The walls were still pale blue. The twin bed still had the spaceship bedspread, faded but carefully tucked in. On the desk, a small lava lamp blinked softly, plugged in as if someone had left the room just moments ago. A stack of crayon drawings lay under a paperweight shaped like a baseball. On the floor sat a pair of worn sneakers, one slightly untied, as though Eli had kicked them off after school and planned to slip back into them after dinner. Lena walked slowly to the dresser. Each item was placed exactly where it had been for nearly 30 years. But her eyes were drawn to one thing, the frame. Above the desk, nailed to the wall, was a wooden picture frame. It was empty. The frame had been there for as long as Lena could remember. Its edges were painted with little yellow stars. One corner had a crack, carefully glued. It looked like it should hold a smiling photo of a child, or a family vacation, or a graduation portrait. But it held nothing, just a square of beige wall. Lena swallowed, blinking against the sudden rush of warmth in her chest. She walked to the frame and reached out, lightly brushing her fingertips against it. Dust clung to her skin. "You never put it up," she whispered aloud, to no one. The sound of Maggie's voice came back to her from years ago, so vivid it felt like the older woman was standing beside her. "Con không muốn mẹ quên con, nhưng nếu mẹ treo ảnh con sẽ không quay lại được nữa. Mẹ hiểu không? I don't want you to forget me, Mommy. But if you hang my picture, then I can't come back. Do you understand?" Maggie had said that to her once, over tea, when Lena was in college and dared to ask why there were no photos of Eli anywhere in the house. At the time, Lena thought it was just a poetic excuse, a way to avoid reopening a wound. But now, after last night, after seeing Maggie clutching that dog like it was her lifeline, she understood. It wasn't an excuse. It was a belief, a rule, a fragile piece of logic that held Maggie's world together. She had lost her son, but she had never let him go. Not really. And that empty frame was the proof. Lena sat on the bed and took a deep breath. Her mind drifted back to the day she first heard what had happened, Summer of 1993. It had been one of those heavy, humid days in Vermont. The kind that makes the trees drip sap and the lake look like a mirror. Eli had gone on a school field trip to Pine Ridge Camp, swimming, hiking, marshmallows, the whole 9 yards. He had just turned 7. Maggie had stayed home to bake. There was a PTA meeting that night, and she was making cinnamon bread. She always said it was Eli's favorite. She was singing along to the radio, halfway through kneading the dough, when the phone rang. It was the school. The teacher's voice was shaky. Eli had wandered off during free swim. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late. They found him near the dock, a few feet beneath the surface. No one saw. No one heard. Lena remembered how Maggie didn't cry, not at first. She remembered her aunt, sitting stiff on the porch for hours, arms folded, as if refusing to accept what had just happened. It wasn't until later, after the funeral, after the casseroles and sympathy cards, that Maggie began to fold in on herself. First, the photos disappeared. Then the laughter. Then the holidays. Eli's room, however, remained untouched. A shrine, a sealed jar of memory that no one dared to open. Lena stood and opened the dresser drawer. Inside were socks so small they fit in the palm of her hand. A plastic watch that didn't tick anymore. A Valentine's Day card, made of construction paper, addressed in shaky block letters. To Mommy, you're my star. Love, Ellie. Her throat tightened. She closed the drawer gently and turned back to the frame. She stood there for a long moment, watching the way the morning light caught the crack in the wood. If grief had a shape, she thought, it would look like that, not shattered, just incomplete. From the hallway, a creak. Then Maggie's voice, hoarse but calm. Did you go in there? Lena turned. Her grandmother stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, hair a mess, eyes clearer than they had been in days. I did, Lena said softly. I saw the frame. Maggie nodded, slow and sad. I could never decide, she whispered. Put him up, or keep him close. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. Together they stood in the silence, the empty frame between them. Not a void, but a presence. A memory not forgotten, not erased, but waiting. Still waiting. Christmas of 2023 came in quietly. Snow had fallen the night before, leaving a thick white blanket over Maple Hollow. Smoke drifted from chimneys. The little shops on Main Street had their windows frosted with fake icicles and strung-up lights that blinked in soft reds and golds. At the Turner house, Lena stood at the doorway, bundled in a wool coat, holding a box wrapped in silver paper. Something inside moved and whimpered. Maggie opened the door slowly. She wore a knitted shawl over a cardigan and slippers that had long since lost their shape. Her eyes were tired. She hadn't put up a tree. No wreath. No music. Just the quiet ticking of a grandfather clock behind her. Lena gave a soft smile. Merry Christmas, Grandma. Maggie's mouth twitched slightly at the corners. You're early. Only by 10 minutes. Lena stepped forward, holding the box out with both hands. And I brought you something. The box wriggled. A small bark escaped. Maggie stepped back. Lena, what is that? Gently. Lena lifted the lid. Out popped a furry, golden face with floppy ears, wide eyes, and a tongue already trying to lick the air. Maggie blinked. It's a dog, she said flatly. Not just a dog, Lena replied. Her name's Hope. The puppy squirmed, already pawing at Maggie's sweater. I thought, I don't know. Maybe you could use some company that talks less than me. Lena added, softer. I can't give you back Eli. But I thought maybe I could give you this. So you wouldn't have to eat dinner alone anymore. Maggie didn't speak. She simply reached down, and the little retriever instantly nestled into her arms like it belonged there. She looked down into the soft brown eyes, and something in her face shifted. Not joy, not quite, but something warmer than the cold she usually wore. She stepped aside and opened the door wider. Come in. And shut that before all the heat gets out. That night, Hope claimed the house like she'd always lived there. She ran through the living room, sniffing every piece of furniture. She found a loose ball of yarn and rolled it across the hardwood like it was treasure. Then, without a hint of shame, she squatted in the middle of the living room and peed directly on Maggie's favorite rug. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Maggie cried, shuffling for paper towels. Lena burst out laughing. "She's still learning. She's destroying," Maggie muttered, blotting the spot. "First day in, and already redecorating." Hope ran past with one of Maggie's house slippers in her mouth. "Definitely redecorating," Lena grinned. Later, when Maggie offered her a leftover ginger cookie, Hope snatched the entire plate instead and trotted under the kitchen table. Maggie threw up her hands. She just stole the whole batch. Lena leaned in with a mischievous smile. "Thằng bé cũng từng ăn bánh rơi đầy cát ngoài sân mà. Bà nhớ không?" Maggie paused. The room grew still. Then very quietly she chuckled. It was the first time Lena had heard her laugh in years. Hope made herself at home in every sense. By the third day, she had rearranged all the couch cushions to form a fortress in the corner. She dragged out an old knitted blanket from the hall closet and made it her nest. Maggie had planned to take it back, but the moment she reached down to grab it, Hope flopped over, curled around the blanket, and sighed like a content toddler after a warm bath. Maggie left the blanket where it was. What struck her more, however, were the patterns. Every evening, just before 5, Hope would pad over to the front door, lay down, and stare through the window. No barking, no scratching, just watching. Maggie noticed. The first time, she thought it was coincidence. The second time, she felt the weight of it. By the third, her hands trembled slightly as she reached to refill Hope's bowl. Eli used to sit in that same spot, right at the door, waiting for the headlights of the school bus to flash, for the sound of her keys in the lock, for snowflakes to land on the glass so he could watch them melt. And there was more. One afternoon, Lena played a Beatles song on her phone while folding laundry. "Here Comes the Sunday." She barely noticed it at first, but Maggie did. Hope tilted her head to the side and stared at the speaker. Then, slowly, she walked over, sat down, and placed one paw on Lena's foot. Maggie sat very still. Eli had done the same thing. When he was small, he used to rest his hand on her foot during bedtime stories, not because he needed to, but because it comforted her. It was nothing more than coincidence, Maggie told herself. Dogs had instincts. They mirrored human behavior. It meant nothing. But then came the sweater. One rainy morning, while Maggie was in the laundry room, she heard scratching from her bedroom. She walked in and saw Hope burrowed deep into the bottom drawer of the cedar chest. In her mouth was a faded yellow sweater wool, hand-knitted, too small for anyone now. The collar was stretched, the sleeves worn thin. Eli had worn it the last autumn. He was alive. Hope dragged the sweater to her blanket fort and curled around it, burying her nose in the fabric, eyes closing in blissful sleep. Maggie stood there for a long time. Her hand rested on the doorframe. Her chest ached not in the sharp, tearing way it had for decades, but in something softer. An ache like stretching after a long winter. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply sat down beside Hope, pulled the sweater gently into her lap, and let her hand move across the soft, faded wool over and over again. Outside, the snow had started to fall again, just enough to coat the pine trees in white. Inside, a little golden dog pressed against a woman who had once forgotten how to feel. The snow came early that night. By 5 o'clock, the town was already blanketed in white. Streetlights cast golden halos onto the icy sidewalks, and tree branches bent under the weight of fresh powder. At the Turner house, all was still except for the steady, slow breathing of a dog curled in the far corner of the living room. Hope hadn't moved in hours. Earlier that afternoon, Maggie had noticed something wasn't right. Hope hadn't barked when the mailman came. She hadn't gotten up when Maggie opened the treat jar. She hadn't even wagged her tail when Lena stopped by with a tin of peanut brittle. Instead, Hope lay curled against the wall, her head resting on a cold patch of tile. Her nose was dry, her eyes half-lidded, her body warm, too warm. Maggie had pressed her hand to Hope's belly and felt the heat radiating off her in waves. Something inside Maggie had seized. Her breath caught, her vision swam. Eli had been warm like that too. The memory came without warning. One minute she was reaching for the phone to call the vet, and the next she was back at Lake Pine, kneeling on the dock, staring at her son's pale body as it was pulled from the water. His hair plastered to his forehead, his skin flushed not from life but from fever, from fear, from death. She had stood frozen that day, unable to move, paralyzed by disbelief. But not tonight. Not this time. Maggie scooped Hope up into her arms, cradling the dog against her chest as if she weighed nothing. She whispered, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. Mommy's not going anywhere." Hope's head lolled. Her breathing came in shallow pants. Maggie didn't think. She just moved. Into the bathroom. Light on. Water running. She filled the old plastic tub with cold water, letting it slosh over the rim. She didn't check the temperature. She didn't care. All she knew was that she had to lower the fever. She had to bring Hope back, now, before it was too late. "Con sợ nước, mẹ biết," she murmured, rocking gently. "But you have to be brave, sweetheart. I'm here now. I won't leave. I'm not baking anymore. I'm not in the kitchen. I'm right here. Mer ser ku con lần này. Mer hua." She eased Hope into the tub. The dog whimpered faintly, but didn't resist. Her limbs hung limp, her eyes fluttering closed. Maggie cupped water in her hands and poured it over Hope's back, over her neck, over her head, over and over. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Stay with Mommy." Outside, across the snowy yard, George stood by his front window. He had been watching the Turner place more frequently since the night the police came. Not out of curiosity, but out of habit. He was used to patterns, the shape of routine, and lately, Maggie's patterns had begun to break. Tonight, the bathroom light had come on, flickering fast. Then silence. Then the sound of water. Then movement. Through the steamed-up window, George squinted and caught a glimpse of Maggie hunched over something in the tub. He couldn't see clearly, just her silhouette, the frantic motion of her arms, the shape of the dog. It looked wrong. It looked like drowning. He grabbed his phone and dialed without thinking. His voice came out harder than intended. "She's doing it again. I told you all this would happen. She's in the bathroom. The dog's in the tub. You better send someone before it's too late." Back inside, Maggie was soaked. Her clothes clung to her skin. Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop. She continued ladling water, pressing Hope's chest, stroking her fur, repeating the same phrase again and again like a prayer. "Not this time. Not this time. I'm here now. Mommy's here." The door burst open moments later. Officer Daniels stepped in first, followed by Wilson. Neither shouted, neither drew a weapon. They had been here before, but even so, what they saw made them both pause. Maggie, kneeling in a puddle, drenched head to toe, holding a limp golden retriever in her lap, her face streaked with tears, her lips moving soundlessly. Daniels crouched beside her, gently touching her shoulder. "Maggie," he said, voice calm and low. "It's okay. I'm here now. Let me take a look." She blinked, dazed. For a moment, she seemed to register his presence. "He was hot," she whispered. "Burning up. I didn't know what else to do. Last time, I wasn't fast enough. I thought if I could just cool him down, if I could be there this time." Daniels nodded slowly. "You did what you could. Let's check on her, okay?" Wilson stepped forward with a blanket, carefully lifting Hope from the water. The dog stirred slightly. Her chest rose and fell, still breathing, weak but alive. Maggie slumped back against the wall, sobbing into her hands. Not loud, not wailing, just the quiet sound of someone unraveling. Outside, the snow continued to fall. George stood on his porch, arms crossed, frowning not from judgment but from something heavier, something he didn't yet understand. Daniels looked down at Maggie, then back at Wilson. "We'll call the vet," he said, "and maybe someone from the clinic, just to check in." Maggie didn't resist. She didn't argue. She just nodded. Hope, now wrapped in the blanket, let out a faint, soft whine and tucked her head beneath Wilson's arm. In that moment, no one said a word. Not George. Not the officers. Not Maggie. The only sound was the soft ticking of the bathroom clock, the rustle of falling snow against the window, and the sound of Maggie whispering one last time. I'm here now. I didn't leave this time. The snow hadn't let up in 3 days. Maple Hollow was buried beneath drifts waist-high, and even the plow trucks had given up trying to keep the side roads clear. Birchwood Lane was hushed beneath its white blanket, a still life of chimneys and icicles and footprints that led nowhere. George Littleton stood on his porch, arms crossed, his breath hanging in the air like smoke. He watched as the police cruiser pulled away from the Turner house. Again, second time this month. It was just past noon. The wind howled between the houses. George tugged his scarf tighter and muttered to himself, "That's enough. I'm Errol." He walked back inside, kicked the snow off his boots, and dialed the town hall from his landline. His voice was sharp, each word clipped with frost. "Officer Daniels, please." "Yes, I'll wait." When Daniels picked up, his voice was calm as always. "George," he said, "what can I do for you?" "This has to stop," George snapped. "I've sat and watched that woman unravel for years. I've made every polite suggestion you people told me to. I've filed complaints. I've called when it got loud. But this is getting out of hand." Daniels exhaled into the phone. "I understand you're concerned." "Concerned?" George's voice rose. "She nearly drowned that dog last night. You think I made that up? You think I enjoy watching someone lose their mind across the street like it's a movie?" There was silence on the line. Then Daniels said quietly, "She wasn't trying to drown the dog. She thought she was saving it." George let out a harsh breath. "Oh, come on. What, now we excuse everything because she's grieving? I've lost people too. You don't see me filling my bathtub with hallucinations." There was a pause. Then Daniels asked, softly, "Who did you lose, George?" George didn't answer at first. His jaw tightened. He looked out the window toward the Turner house. Hope lay curled on the porch again, bundled in a blanket Lena had left behind. Maggie hadn't come outside, not since the night before. George cleared his throat. "My wife," he said finally. 2020. COVID year. Daniels didn't interrupt. "She was in the care home outside Brattleboro," George went on, his voice quieter now. "They locked it down before Christmas. Said no visitors. Said it was safer that way. Safer. Like being alone while you die is safer." Daniels said nothing. "I called every day. I sent letters. I even made a sign and stood outside her window in the snow for her birthday. But she was already fading. She didn't see it. Didn't see me." George's voice cracked. Just once, and he caught it like a cough. "I never got to say goodbye," he added. "They called me at 2 in the morning to tell me she'd passed. Just like that. And the next day, they mailed me her Bible and a pair of socks." More silence. Then Daniel said, "I'm sorry, George." George grunted. "Yeah, well, doesn't change anything." There was a pause on the line. Then Daniel spoke again. "Listen, there's something I want you to see. Can you come by the station?" George hesitated. "Why?" "Because sometimes the only way to understand what someone's holding on to is to see what they never let go of." Half an hour later, George stepped through the front door of the Maple Hollow Police Department, brushing snow off his shoulders. Daniels was waiting at the counter, a small cardboard box in his hands. "We collected a few of Maggie's personal effects last night when we were trying to calm her down. She had these stored in a side drawer, labeled for donation." George raised an eyebrow. "So?" Daniels handed him a weathered envelope. Postmarked August, 1993. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably that of a child. "To Mom," it read. Inside was a postcard. A cartoon dolphin leaping from a blue sea. On the back, written in blue marker, "Hi, Mommy. I'm at camp. I miss you. I'm learning to swim. This time I won't quit. Love, Eli." George stared at it for a long moment. The ink had smudged in places. A small brown stain clung to one corner. Maybe hot cocoa, maybe tears. Daniel said gently, "She never opened it. 30 years, and it stayed sealed. She couldn't bear to know what was inside, couldn't risk that it would make it more real." George didn't speak. She still sets a place for him at the table sometimes, Daniels continued. You probably didn't know that, but we've seen it. Knife, fork, spoon, little folded napkin. She's not just stuck. She's trying to hold on to what's already gone. George finally looked up. His eyes were red. I didn't know, he said. I figured, Daniels replied. Most people don't. George handed the postcard back, but Daniels shook his head. Keep it. Maybe it'll help you see her like more than just the woman across the street. That evening, George walked slowly across Birchwood Lane, a box in one hand, scarf flapping in the wind. He knocked gently on Maggie's door. It took a while, but eventually she opened it, her eyes tired, her face pale. I'm not here to scold, George said. I'm here because I found something of yours. He held out the postcard. Maggie took it like it was made of glass. Her hands trembled. I never read it, she whispered. I know, George replied. But I think you should. She didn't answer. She just nodded and stepped aside to let him in. The snow was still falling the morning Maggie Turner was admitted to the Maple Hollow Community Wellness Center. It wasn't a hospital. There were no sterile white walls or fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. It looked more like a big country house, yellow siding, a wraparound porch, and a bell that chimed softly over the front door. Inside, the floors were warm with old oak, and the air smelled faintly of chamomile and wood smoke. Lena had helped pack Maggie's overnight bag. A few sweaters, her toothbrush, and tucked at the very bottom, the faded yellow sweater that once belonged to Eli. Maggie hadn't said a word about it. She had just folded it quietly, pressing it flat with the palm of her hand. Dr. Rosa Alvarez met her at the front door. She wasn't what Maggie expected. Rosa wore a denim jacket over a flowered blouse and had silver hair twisted up into a braid that fell over her shoulder. She didn't carry a clipboard. She didn't speak in a therapist's voice. Instead, she simply smiled and extended her hand. I'm Rosa, she said. Welcome. You're not here to be fixed. You're just here to rest a while. Maggie hesitated, then shook her hand. She didn't speak much that first day. She didn't need to. Rosa didn't ask 100 questions. She didn't hand her forms to fill out or make her revisit the night with the dog. She simply walked Maggie through the common room, past a crackling fireplace, and offered her a cup of mint tea. They sat across from each other in silence for almost half an hour. Outside, wind blew the snow sideways across the window panes. Finally, Rosa spoke not about trauma or memory or grief, but about hurricanes. When Katrina came, she said softly, I was in New Orleans. I had a son, 12 years old. His name was Luis. He played trumpet like his father. She paused. He got separated from me in the flood, just for a few hours. I found him later, but he was already gone. No, Maggie didn't say anything. She just reached across the table and gently touched Rosa's hand. That was the beginning. They never spoke of their children again, not in full sentences, but the understanding lingered in the space between them, like candlelight. At mealtimes, Maggie sat beside Rosa in the dining room, where other residents quietly ate soup or filled out crossword puzzles in silence. When Rosa passed her the salt, Maggie would nod and smile. It was enough. Once, when Rosa refilled Maggie's teacup, she joked, We don't have a bathtub here, by the way. Maggie blinked, startled. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Well, then I guess I won't get arrested again, she said, her voice hoarse with warmth. That night, she slept through without waking for the first time in weeks. Hope, meanwhile, had not forgotten. Each afternoon at exactly 4:30, the golden retriever trotted down the sidewalk from Lena's place to the front window of the center. She would sit quietly, tail wrapped around her paws, nose pressed against the glass. If Maggie was in group therapy, someone would gently tap her shoulder and say, She's here. Maggie would excuse herself, walk to the window, and wave. Hope would quiver with excitement, tail sweeping the ground in wide arcs. Sometimes, Maggie would slip outside for a moment. She wasn't allowed to take Hope home yet, but she could sit on the bench just outside the door. Hope would rest her head on Maggie's knee and close her eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of her human. Maggie would stroke her ears in slow circles, saying nothing. That was all either of them needed. The days passed slowly. In the afternoons, Maggie helped Rosa tend to the greenhouse behind the center, an old converted shed with glass panels and shelves of struggling herbs. Maggie found herself lost in the simplicity of repotting basil, of brushing dirt off mint leaves, of holding something living that depended on her hands but asked for nothing else. One morning, Rosa offered Maggie a worn leather notebook. "I keep this in case something wants out," she said. "You don't have to show it to me. Just let it breathe." Maggie hesitated, then took the book. At first, she only drew. Shapes, circles, the outline of a child's hand, the curved letters of Eli's name, over and over again. But one day, she wrote, "I am not broken. I am just holding something sharp." She closed the notebook and left it on the nightstand. Later, Rosa found it, read the line, and tucked a small flower between its pages. On the 15th day, Maggie sat by the fire after dinner. Hope had arrived early and was already curled beside her feet, content to be still. Rosa came over, holding 2 cups of cocoa. She sat quietly for a long time, then asked, "Do you know what forgiveness really is?" Maggie looked at the flames, not answering. "It's not letting someone off the hook," Rosa said. "It's letting go of the rope that's dragging you under." Maggie stared into the fire. Her hands trembled slightly. Then she nodded. "I think I'm ready to let go," she said. "Good," Rosa smiled. "Then let's walk you home soon." Spring came slowly that year, like a promise kept in silence. It had been the coldest winter in 30 years, but the last of the snow melted by mid-March. The maples along Birchwood Lane stood bare but ready, their branches trembling in the breeze, as if whispering something too sacred to say out loud. Maggie Turner stood in the front room of her house, holding a small frame in her hands. The room was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the mantel clock and the faint hum of a record player in the background. The Beatles played something gentle, not the upbeat kind, but one of their slower tracks. Maggie didn't know which song. She didn't care. She just liked the way it made the room feel full. She took a deep breath and looked at the wall in front of her. The space above the fireplace had been empty for as long as she could remember. Not blank empty, like a space kept clear for someone who might return. But now, it was time. With careful hands, she lifted the frame and placed it on the hook. It clicked softly into place. The photograph showed Eli at age 7, standing in front of a school bus, wearing the yellow sweater Maggie had knitted for him. His grin was crooked, one tooth missing. His eyes were bright with mischief. Beside the photo, Maggie had placed another frame. This one was more recent, a candid shot that Lena had taken without asking. In it, Hope was lying on the living room rug, her nose resting on that same yellow sweater, now faded and worn. Her eyes were half closed, as if dreaming. 2 frames, side by side. Maggie stepped back, took them in, and exhaled. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling either. But the heaviness in her chest, the one that had settled there for 3 decades, had lifted, if only a little. It was enough. Outside, the afternoon sun stretched across the porch steps. A breeze lifted the curtains just slightly, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Not Hope, not yet, but some neighbor's dog announcing spring with a voice like joy. There was a knock at the door. Maggie turned. Standing there was George Littleton, holding a pie dish in his hands. He wore his usual cardigan and cap, though the cap looked newer. His face was flushed from the walk, and he shifted awkwardly from one foot to the other. "I made apple," he said. "Figured it was less controversial than peach." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "You think I have strong opinions about fruit?" "I think you have strong opinions about everything," George muttered, then cleared his throat. "Listen, I'm not great with words. I say things I shouldn't. I've got a big mouth and a short fuse, and that's a dangerous combination." She waited, arms folded, watching him carefully. He went on. "But if you ever need someone to walk the dog with, I could use the exercise, and I know the routes." Maggie stepped aside and let him in. Hope came trotting around the corner, tail wagging like a metronome on double time. She barked once, circled George's legs, then sat down expectantly at his feet. "She likes you," Maggie said. "She has questionable judgment," George replied. Maggie poured 2 cups of tea. They sat at the kitchen table. Hope nestled between them like a child who'd heard this story before. After a few sips, George said, "So, what's she like on walks?" "She pulls left, always toward the bakery. Smart dog. And she only walks well if you play Beatles music on your phone. Preferably Let It Be or Here Comes the Sunday." George blinked. "I don't own a phone." Maggie grinned. "Then I guess you'd better start humming." Low. They sat in silence for a while after that. The kind that only 2 people with history can share. Not romantic, not even close friends, but something more durable, complicated, real. Hope sighed and curled up on Maggie's feet. George nodded toward the living room. "You finally put it up." Maggie followed his gaze to the framed photos. She looked at them for a long time. "I didn't think I ever could," she admitted. George didn't press. He just waited. "I used to think," she said slowly, "that hanging Eli's picture meant giving up, like admitting he was gone forever. But now I think, maybe it just means he's home." George nodded once. Maggie reached down and stroked Hope's ears. "I don't think she's him," she said, almost as if confessing to herself. "I don't believe in things like that. Reincarnation, souls in fur coats." George waited. "But," she went on, voice softer, "she reminds me that love doesn't end. It changes shape. It shows up when you least expect it, and sometimes it walks on 4 legs." The clock chimed softly in the background. Hope looked up, ears perked. Outside, the clouds had cleared just enough to let sunlight pour through the windows, pooling on the floor like spilled honey. George stood. "Well, I'll bring the leash tomorrow." Maggie smiled. "Bring your humming voice too." By the time spring touched Maple Hollow, the snow had melted, but something deeper had thawed as well. On a quiet afternoon, in a house where time had once stopped, Maggie Turner stood in front of her fireplace. She gently placed a photograph of her son, Eli, on the wall, a photo she had kept hidden for 30 years. Next to it, she framed a new image. Hope, the golden retriever, curled around Eli's yellow sweater, fast asleep. 2 hearts, one past, one present. When her neighbor George brought over a homemade pie, he fumbled through his words, trying to apologize for years of coldness and judgment. Maggie looked him in the eye and said, "She likes the Beatles when she walks. Can you hum Let It Be?" And for the first time in years, George laughed. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't crash through the door. It arrives in pieces, in shared silence, in small gestures. Sometimes it comes wrapped in fur and trust and a wet nose nudging your hand at just the right moment. There was no miracle cure. Maggie still missed Eli every day, but she had stopped drowning in that memory. She had learned that grieving doesn't mean forgetting, and love never leaves. It just changes shape. As Hope lay beside her, Maggie whispered the words she once couldn't bear to say. "I forgive you, and I forgive myself." This is not a story about tragedy. It's a story about how, sometimes, the only way to survive loss is to learn to love again in a different way. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is simply to stay. Fred Rogers. And this story proves that the elderly don't need supervision. They need someone to truly listen. They don't need saving. They need to be seen, felt, and heard. Because love doesn't need to make sense. It only needs to be real. So, if this story moved something in you, if it made you pause or breathe a little deeper, please consider subscribing to Valor Tails. This growing community, this channel, is built to share more than just stories. It's built on compassion, on remembrance, on the belief that even in the darkest rooms, there's always a light. If someone is willing to knock on the door and say, "I see you, I hear you, I'm here." We're on our journey to 5,000 souls. You could be one of them. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes hope walks in on 4 legs.